For nearly a decade, Sandra Diaz worked inside one of Donald Trump's most private properties, witnessing a side of his world that few outsiders ever saw. She says she followed strict rules, kept sensitive details hidden, and helped maintain an image of flawless luxury until she decided she couldn't stay silent anymore. What changed after years of loyalty? And what did she claim to have witnessed behind the closed doors of Trump's Bedminster estate? To understand why she decided to break her silence, we have to go back to where it all began. Sandra Diaz arrived at Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey, in March 2010, hoping for something many immigrants seek: a steady job and the chance to build a better future. Instead, she entered a workplace where every detail revolved around preserving a carefully crafted image. Born in Costa Rica, she had arrived in the United States in 2009 on a tourist visa and decided to overstay after a compatriot who worked at the club offered her a job. Like many Hispanic workers there, she was told she didn't have to worry about her lack of legal work papers. All she had to provide supervisors was an envelope with 4 photos. She made $10 an hour, cleaning the 2 Trump houses on the property. Working inside Trump's private residence was unlike any housekeeping position she had held before. Cleanliness wasn't simply part of the job, it was treated as a reflection of the Trump brand itself. Every room had to appear untouched, every surface spotless, every belonging positioned exactly where it belonged. She quickly realized she wasn't just cleaning homes. She was helping maintain an image of perfection. Even the smallest mistake could attract criticism from supervisors responsible for protecting the property's reputation. Sandra gradually became aware of Trump's various obsessions. The first was flies. "It was terrible if I found a fly," she said. Many times he got very upset because he was having dinner on the patio and the flies came, but he detests them. It's a phobia. She also learned about his meticulous routines. On the bedside table, the maids had to make sure there were always 3 boxes of Tic Tac, Trump's favorite mint. Next to them, Trump expected neat stacks of $20, $50, and $100 bills, which he regularly handed out as tips at his clubs. And then there was the makeup. Sandra said Trump's shirts were almost always stained on the collar with his distinctive orange facial makeup. Mr. Trump likes to use makeup, so the shirts always had makeup on them. "I washed them. On one occasion I used a liquid. I tried everything and it wouldn't come out," she said. On many occasions Melania sent us special liquids from New York to see if we could remove the makeup from her collars. When the detergents didn't work, supervisors quietly replaced the shirts with new ones. Staff were not permitted to throw out any of Trump's garments. The guests who visited Bedminster saw elegant rooms, manicured grounds, and effortless luxury. What they rarely saw were the workers moving quietly through hallways before sunrise, preparing every space long before anyone arrived. Housekeepers became experts at remaining unnoticed. Avoiding eye contact with high-profile guests became part of the routine. According to Sandra, invisibility wasn't accidental, it became part of the job description. Beds had to look untouched, closets had to resemble luxury showroom displays, and bathrooms had to appear as though no one had ever used them. The goal wasn't simply cleanliness. It was creating an atmosphere where wealth appeared effortless. But maintaining that illusion came with constant pressure. Sandra recalled that workers lived with the understanding that even a small oversight could jeopardize their position. Through her responsibilities, she also observed how much attention Donald Trump reportedly paid to order and presentation. Every object had its place, routines carefully structured. To Sandra, this reflected not only personal preference but a desire for complete control over his environment. And as time passed, she began noticing that silence was valued just as much as hard work. Although housekeeping involved demanding physical labor, Sandra says the greatest pressure often came from something less visible: the expectation that employees remain silent. From her earliest days at Bedminster, she noticed rules that were never officially written but were understood by everyone. Workers were expected not to speak unless spoken to avoid lingering in hallways, and to keep conversations short. Most importantly, they learned never to discuss what happened inside the property. Those expectations, Sandra says, shaped daily life as much as cleaning schedules. Managers closely supervised employees, reminding them to remain professional, discreet, and focused. According to Sandra, staying unnoticed was often viewed as the safest way to keep your job. For Sandra Diaz, loyalty wasn't something that earned recognition, it was simply expected. Every day she arrived ready to work, completed her assignments with care, and followed the rules that governed life behind the scenes. Like many of her co-workers, she believed consistency, hard work, and discretion would provide stability. And for years, that belief kept her going. Sandra recalled that Donald Trump occasionally tipped employees, gestures appreciated as rare moments of acknowledgement. He kept neat stacks of $20, $50, and $100 bills in his nightstand, lining his pockets each day to reward those who met his standards. But according to Sandra, occasional generosity never changed the larger reality of the workplace. Employees were still expected to perform at the highest level every single day, and praise didn't guarantee job security. Sandra also learned how far the rules of the household went. One day, her supervisor handed her one of Trump's socks with a hole in it. He told me, "You can't throw it away." "Sandra, do me a favor, darn it," she recalled. Only when Trump himself threw something on the floor near the bed did staff know it could be thrown away. Otherwise, never. The same rule applied to his soap. He has a special bath soap that he uses, but you never could throw it away even if only the smallest sliver remained. Nothing belonging to the man of the house could be discarded without his permission. One overlooked detail, one complaint, one mistake, any of these could suddenly change how an employee was viewed. Sandra says many workers lived with the understanding that their value depended entirely on whether they remained useful to the organization. Years of dependable service could be overshadowed by a single error, so employees became cautious not only about their work but also about what they said, who they trusted, and how much attention they attracted. Remaining dependable wasn't enough, they also had to remain invisible. Sandra gradually realized that loyalty inside the organization seemed to flow in only one direction. Workers were expected to dedicate their time, energy, and complete discretion to preserving the image of the estate, yet they could be replaced without much notice. To Sandra, that became one of the most difficult lessons of her years at Bedminster. Loyalty was rewarded only as long as it remained convenient, and once that convenience disappeared, years of commitment often meant very little. But there was another presence inside the household that employees also paid close attention to, one that rarely spoke loudly, yet still influenced the atmosphere around them. Sandra described Donald Trump as someone whose expectations were direct and easy to recognize. Melania Trump, however, was different. According to Sandra, she rarely interacted extensively with housekeeping staff, yet her presence was felt throughout the residence. Every room had to meet exceptionally high standards whenever Melania was expected to be there. She rarely needed to issue instructions. Workers believed she noticed details others might overlook. A flower arrangement slightly out of place, a wrinkle in freshly prepared linens, a decorative item positioned differently than expected. Sandra says even small imperfections could become sources of concern because employees never knew exactly what would draw attention. Unlike Donald Trump's more visible reactions, Melania's responses were quieter and more restrained, creating a different kind of pressure. Without frequent verbal feedback, workers often second-guessed whether their work met expectations, becoming especially meticulous when preparing spaces connected to Melania. Her clothes had to be washed with a special detergent, separate from the rest of the family. Melania is very strict and she likes it to be completely clean, neat, white, no stains, nothing, Sandra said. The atmosphere wasn't necessarily louder, it was simply more cautious. To Sandra, this reflected the broader culture inside the estate. Perfection wasn't treated as an achievement, but as the minimum standard. Of all the Trumps, Sandra said, the president's daughter Ivanka was the most distant, strict with the maids and rarely even greeting them. She is too demanding, and apart from that she's someone who is very intolerant and doesn't even greet you, Sandra said. Yet despite all those efforts, Sandra says many workers still felt uncertain about where they truly stood. Recognition was rare, expectations remained high, and silence shaped nearly every interaction. Eventually, Sandra reached a point where remaining silent no longer felt possible. But before that decision could be made, something happened that changed everything. By the summer of 2015, Sandra Diaz had spent years working inside one of Donald Trump's most recognizable properties, watching the man she cleaned for begin his march toward the presidency. On June 16, 2015, standing in the golden escalator of Trump Tower, Donald Trump announced his campaign for president. In that speech, he delivered a line about immigrants that would echo around the world. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. For Sandra, those words landed like a thunderbolt. She had spent years inside the man's home, cleaning his rooms, washing his clothes, caring for his family. Now, in a single sentence, he had placed people like her in the same category as criminals. He treats us like criminals, and we entered his house, as if like thieves, like rapists, and we have been with his wife, with his children, with his grandchildren, she said. According to Sandra, it was around this time that their supervisor became more aggressive. Her name was Agnieszka Kluska, a Polish immigrant who boasted of having previously worked as a policewoman in her home country. The workers knew her as Agnes. Sandra alleged the supervisor humiliated the housekeepers and warned that if they complained, immigration authorities could show up at their door. According to the women's attorney, Anibal Romero, the supervisors seemed to feel they had the protection of the commander-in-chief. This is something we see a lot today, where employers are using immigration as an excuse to justify their actions, Romero said. For Sandra, the contradiction became impossible to ignore. The same man who handed out generous tips and congratulated his cleaning staff on their work had, overnight, placed them in the same category as an immigrant plague invading the United States. We began to speak amongst ourselves, she said. But everyone stayed quiet, because everyone had their own interests. Everyone, that is, except Sandra. She decided she had had enough. By December 2018, Sandra Diaz had decided she could no longer remain silent. Her decision wasn't caused by one specific incident, she later explained, but by years of observing contradictions between public messaging about immigration and the realities she witnessed inside the workplace. Making that choice wasn't easy. By then Sandra had become a legal resident, but speaking publicly still carried risks for her future and her employment. Even so, she concluded that telling her story mattered more than staying quiet. In 2018, she and her friend Victorina Morales, a Guatemalan housekeeper who had taken over Sandra's position when she left the club in 2013, went public together. Their accounts attracted immediate and widespread media attention, first through Univision and then through the New York Times, which published Victorina's story under the headline, "Making President Trump's Bed. A Housekeeper Without Papers." Their interviews introduced audiences to a perspective rarely heard before, that of housekeepers describing daily life inside one of Trump's most prominent properties. Sandra spoke about demanding workloads, strict expectations, and what she believed were systemic contradictions affecting undocumented workers. Her story quickly became part of a broader national conversation about immigration, employment practices, and political rhetoric. Supporters and critics interpreted her account very differently. Some viewed her testimony as an important first-hand perspective from someone who had worked behind closed doors. Others disputed her claims and defended the Trump Organization. Neither the Trump Organization nor the White House responded to requests for comment. Regardless of the differing reactions, Sandra had accomplished something she once believed impossible. She had replaced years of silence with her own voice. Once her story entered the public conversation, it became impossible to separate the polished image of the estate from the experiences she described behind it. But Sandra believed her story pointed toward something even larger, a hidden system of labor few visitors ever stopped to consider. The hidden cost behind the luxury. As Sandra Diaz reflected on her years at Bedminster, she came to believe that the polished image guests admired came at a cost few people ever considered. Visitors saw immaculate buildings, pristine golf courses, elegant dining areas, and luxurious private residences, every room appearing effortless. But according to Sandra, that appearance depended on workers whose contributions remained almost entirely invisible. Sandra described demanding schedules that extended well beyond a standard workday, preparing guest rooms, cleaning multiple residences, handling laundry, resetting event spaces. The work rarely slowed down, especially during busy seasons when important visitors filled the property. Housekeepers spent hours standing, lifting, bending, and cleaning to exceptionally high standards every single day. Not just anyone can handle the pressure, the speed, and the treatment, she said. Sandra also recalled that many employees believed they had little room to negotiate better conditions because they feared losing their jobs. For undocumented workers, that uncertainty carried additional weight. Some worried that raising concerns could place both their employment and immigration status at risk. Many hoped continued loyalty would lead to better pay or greater security. For Sandra, those expectations often remained just that, expectations. As the years passed, she began seeing a pattern. The luxury guests experienced depended on workers performing difficult jobs behind the scenes, yet those workers rarely appeared in the story presented to the public. Their names were unknown, their experiences unseen, their contributions largely unrecognized. To Sandra, that became one of the greatest contradictions of all. The people responsible for creating an atmosphere of comfort and perfection often felt the least secure themselves. Looking back, she believed the estate reflected a system where appearance always came first, while the workers sustaining that appearance remained hidden in the background. That realization eventually led Sandra to ask a much larger question. If her experience revealed so much about one workplace, what did it reveal about power itself? Sandra Diaz's account extends beyond one employee's experience. Whether people agree with her conclusions or not, her story sparked a broader discussion about power, visibility, and the people whose work often goes unnoticed. Throughout her years at Bedminster, Sandra believed she had become part of a system built on presentation. Everything visitors encountered was carefully prepared long before anyone arrived. The goal was simple: create an experience that looked flawless. For Sandra, that illusion depended on workers whose names most guests would never know. Behind every prepared suite, every pressed golf shirt, every polished hallway, someone had spent hours making sure everything looked effortless. Yet those workers rarely became part of the public image they helped create. Sandra also believed her experience highlighted another contradiction. She worked inside a business owned by a man whose public positions on immigration became a defining feature of his political career. At the same time, Sandra says many of the people responsible for maintaining the property came from immigrant backgrounds similar to her own. That contrast became impossible for her to ignore. It eventually convinced her that remaining silent no longer reflected her own values. "Trump has always used us," she said. "He used us to get to power." When she shared her story publicly, reactions were immediate. Some praised her courage. Others questioned her account. Supporters of Donald Trump argued that her allegations did not fairly represent the organization, while critics viewed her testimony as evidence of deeper workplace problems. Regardless of where people stood politically, Sandra's interviews shifted attention toward workers who rarely receive public recognition. Her story encouraged audiences to consider the employees working quietly behind every luxury brand, political figure, and successful business. It also raised enduring questions. Who keeps these institutions running? Whose work remains invisible? And how often do the people behind the scenes receive the same recognition as the people standing in front of the cameras? Sandra never claimed to have all the answers. She simply shared what she says she experienced. Years after leaving Bedminster, her account continues to be discussed because it offers a perspective that few people ever had access to. A view from inside one of America's most recognizable private estates. Whether viewed as a whistleblower, a former employee telling her story, or simply someone describing her own experiences, Sandra changed the conversation. She reminded people that behind every carefully managed image are individuals whose stories may never be seen unless someone decides to tell them. And in her case, that decision transformed years of silence into a story heard around the world. Sandra Diaz's account offers a rare glimpse into a side of Donald Trump's world that most people never see. Whether you agree with her perspective or not, her story raises important questions about power, loyalty, and the often unseen workers who help maintain public images behind closed doors. In the end, history isn't shaped only by the people in the spotlight, but also by those whose stories are rarely heard. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. And be sure to watch the next video on your screen for another remarkable story that goes beyond the headlines.